morning, Royal High School Woodshop. Hey, today we've got a really cool video that I'm going to show you, and a really cool topic that is by far one of the more interesting topics that we get to cover, because it really comes to the heart of woodworking. So once I understand how to make boards square, right, I can take any board and make it square following the 7 steps. The next thing I need to know how to do is, how do I join that board to other boards in order to make a project like a grandfather clock, an Adirondack chair? How do I join wood together, right? In a welding class or a metal shop class, I'm gonna weld it, or I'm gonna bolt it together with bolts and nuts and washers, right? Things like that. But how do I join wood together in order to make projects? Well, that's what we're gonna look at today as we take a look at cutting woodworking joinery. So why don't you join me back in the lab, and let's go take a look at how we cut some of the woodworking joints that are used in the woodworking process. Well, all my pieces are now ripped to width on the table saw for making the wood joints. The next tool that I need in the process of cutting wood joints is the chop saw. Most of the wood joints are going to have flat ends, and then we're going to do something with that flat square end. So this is my next tool. And I'll cut a few pieces that should work for my process. All right, off to cut some wood joints. Now, we have our pieces cut, and there's multiple ways that we could put some of this together. We're gonna combine both power tool and hand tool, so we get to see both of those in action. So the most basic woodworking joint that we work with in woodworking is called a butt joint. You've read about that. You'll do that in your project. You'll make one. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 2 boards that are square on the end and flat, and I'm going to glue them together and nail them like that. Now, by themselves, a butt joint really is useless. It won't do me any good. So because of that, a butt joint has to have some sort of reinforcement. And to reinforce this, I'm going to use 2 things. I'm going to use glue and nails. So to begin with, I'm going to drive the nails in so they're just about ready to enter the end grain of the other piece of wood, right? A butt joint is putting the side grain of one piece on the end grain of another. That is primarily where butt joints are used, or how they are put together. Now, it could be put together edge grain to edge grain. That sometimes will happen, but for the most part, we're putting the pieces together like that. And that especially makes it weak, because end grain added to anything doesn't work very well. It makes it weak. So we really want to put glue. We want to add as many possible reinforcement pieces as we can. So I'm going to start by putting the nails in, because once I start driving nails on slippery glue, it's not going to work very well. It's going to create some problem. So I'll go ahead and start the nails right now while there's no glue to slip around on. Now I'm ready to add the glue. So now that I have the nails put in, I'm going to add a little bit of glue on the surfaces. So I'll add glue to the side grain there underneath the nails, and I'll add glue to the end grain here. My big job here is to make sure all the surfaces are aligned and flush or smooth before I start driving my nail in. That looks good. And now, last thing I can do is bring my nail set in, because I want to drive the nail down below the surface of the board. All right, and there it is, just like that, very quickly. There's a butt joint. Now again, I need to sit that aside and let it dry. It's very weak. The nails help, but in terms of being able to hold itself together long term, this may not be the most effective way to do it. There's lots of places in projects where the butt joint is exactly what we got to use. This is the joint needed based on what we're trying to accomplish. But there are other occasions where this is not the best joint to use. We want to go to something more fancy, more technical and complicated, because then the joint itself physically helps to hold itself together. So let's look at that. We're going to look at cutting a dovetail by hand. All right, well, let me show you here on a drawing what a dovetail actually looks like. Now I'm going to go forward a little bit. We're going to use a word from our shop talk terms, and this is called an isometric projection. So I'm going to draw this on the flat board using drafting techniques in 3D. So you can kind of get a 3D look at what the dovetail joint is supposed to look like before we actually cut it. Well, as you can see right here, we have our two pieces. The two pieces are going to interlock. This piece right here has a hole in it, as you can see. That's called the socket. That has to be cut out. That's what we're going to attempt to do. Now, this piece over here has a pin on it. You can see here, this piece has a little piece sticking out. This is called a pin. This piece that sticks out has got to fit. It's got to be the exact same shape as this hole right here, and it will fit in there and it locks into place. So these are called pins and tails, and this is a socket. And that's what we're going to attempt to cut on the end of our board. To start out my dovetail joints, I need to take a couple seconds and do a little layout. So they're a little more complicated than a butt joint. I just need two pieces, put them together and nail them. I'm done. The dovetail is a little more complicated. So I'm going to take the two pieces for the dovetail, and they are going to fit together like that, but they're going to overlap each other. So I need to draw, they're about 3/4 of an inch thick. I need to draw a line around the end of each of these pieces, because we're going to cut a piece out here, we're going to cut a piece out here, the two things are going to interlock. So I need to draw a shoulder about 3/4 of an inch down, or the thickness of this piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay the piece on there like that. Make sure it's flush, and I'm going to mark it. Now I'm going to put the two pieces together, and I'm going to make sure that the ends line up here. Then I'm going to take my tri-square, and I'm going to draw a line all the way around both pieces using my tri-square. Next, I have a little jig, and this is a jig for marking dovetails. So there's a shoulder up here on the top that's been nailed to this piece down below. These are at a right angle, and then this end has about an 8-degree cut on it. Now, dovetail joints have 8-degree tapers. They get wider and wider and wider by about 8 degrees. So that's the angle that's on here, and I'm going to use this now. This will allow me to just mark very quickly, and then I can flip it around like that and mark the other side. So I'll start, I'm going to measure in from each edge of this piece of wood. I'm going to measure in about 3/8 of an inch and put a mark. Okay, so there, I now have a little mark here and here. Now I'm going to take my tapered fixture or jig, and I'm going to throw that on there, and I'm going to use that to draw the tapered line, like that. Now I'm going to flip it over. All right, so I have my first line here. Now I'm going to take my fixture, set it up there, hold it really flat to the top, make sure I'm lined up with my pencil mark, and draw my line there. All right, and there I go. There's my dovetail, right? It's a little bit wider at the bottom, a little bit more narrow at the top, and that's what's going to create the locking mechanism. Now, so I'm going to, because these two pieces have to fit like a glove, I'm going to go ahead and cut this part out, and then once that's cut out, I'm going to use this piece right here as my template. So to cut this, I'll go ahead and put it in my vise. I'm going to take my tri-square and I'm going to draw this line where the socket needs to take place. I'm going to draw that line straight across, so I make sure I cut it very straight. And then I'm going to go ahead and, using my fixture and using these marks, I carried over to the other side. I'm going to go ahead and put this on there. And draw them on this side. If I do everything right, they should be lined up identically on both sides of the piece of wood. Okay, so now here is the piece that has to come out, and I can see it on that side as well as that side. So I'm going to start the process of cutting out a hand cut dovetail with a dovetail saw. Right, now dovetail saw has a metal spine down the back that keeps that saw very rigid. It's a very thin piece of metal, so it gives me a nice fine cut. The rigid spine down the back makes sure that saw stays very straight. And notice there's not a lot of room here. The saw cannot go very deep into a piece of wood because it's not intended to. It's a dovetail saw. Dovetails happen about 3/4 of an inch on the end of a board, and that's it. So this dovetail saw is perfect for cutting this. Now when I cut this, I need to use as much precision as I can come up with, because I want all of these cuts to be very straight. If they're crooked, it's going to make it very hard to get the dovetail pieces to all fit together, and ultimately when it's done, even if I do get it to work, it's not going to look very good. The more accurate I can make the cuts, the better the finished product is not only going to look, but fit together. Alright, well, whenever I'm working with any woodworking tools, I always want to have my glasses on. Right, I'm going to put this piece of wood in a vise clamped to a bench. That's going to hold it securely while I make this cut. I have my socket drawn on both sides, so I want to keep an eye on it. I want to to make sure both sides of the blade touch the pencil line at the same time. I'm touching back here. I'm really close here, so I'm just going to carefully kind of flatten it out. All right, that side's done. Now I'm going to come over here. All right, well, there it is. So that looks, my cuts now go all the way down to the shoulder. The shoulder is where the other piece of wood is going to rest. So now it's time to take this socket out of the center, and I'm going to do that with some chisels. All right, well, there's nothing more important to making good dovetails than a nice grinder. The tool that we're going to use to cut the dovetail out, the socket out, is a chisel. But the chisel's not going to work very good unless it's extremely sharp. So I'm going to go ahead and take a second to grind these chisels so they're all sharp so we can go over and complete our dovetail. The next thing I need to do now is I need to cut out this little piece. I'm going to remove the piece of wood that's right here in my picture. So to do that, I'm going to use my chisel and I'm going to use a mallet. Now, this piece right here, that line right there is called the shoulder that the other piece is going to rest against. I want that as straight and as square as I can get it. I want to cut that right on my pencil line that I drew. Now notice I've got my piece clamped down, right? I'm clamping it down there so I can really hit on it. I'm gonna have to turn it over, so I'll undo it and do that. But it just frees me up to work on the piece and I don't have to worry about the piece sliding around. The chisel, the flat part of the chisel faces the shoulder because I want that to be the clean cut. The rest of this comes out. So I'm gonna take this one now. I've got a nice deep cut right here. I'm gonna take this and I'm going to get that piece of wood out of there. Now let me bring you in a little closer so you can watch this close up. All right, I'm going to put my 1-inch chisel in. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat to the line. I'm going to hit it a few times. And because the opening right here is a little shorter than 1 inch, I'm going to grab this chisel and that piece just comes right out. All right, now it's time to come from the other side. What I don't want to do is try to cut from one side only and make a mess on the other side of the board. This has got a nice clean edge on it, so I'm going to turn around and create a nice clean edge on the other side. So I'm going to flip that over. Now, this is where it's going to be helpful if my pencil line right here was drawn in the same spot as it is on the other side. The more careful I am, the better this turns out. Again, I want to really work hard at getting that chisel right on that shoulder. All right, so the piece is fallen out, so now I'm gonna take all the rest of that out, and there it is. There is my socket ready for the next piece to come in. And I can look in here if need be, right? If I need to, I can look in here and try to clean up anything that's not perfectly flat. So what I want to do now is I'm going to take this and go like that. I'm going to lay the two pieces together and I'm going to mark right here. I'm going to mark this using the piece it's got to fit into. Okay, so now there it is. There is the piece that's marked and it matches the socket that I cut here because I traced it. Now what I need to do is I'm going to bring the lines here and bring them down so I have my shoulder, and it shows me exactly where I need to cut these pieces off. To do that, I'm going to get my tri-square. All right, there it is. So now these are ready to cut. All right, well, this part is the easier part because these are two easy cuts that will meet and the little piece will fall out, and then I'm ready to go. Once again, I'm going to refer back to my dovetail saw. Give me a nice clean cut here. Put my glasses back on. Now again, it's important that I remember I want these lines to be all as perfect as I can get them because they're going to fit like a glove. The further off everything is, the less they're going to fit. The looser everything might be. I'm probably okay with it being a little tighter than loose because I can always bring it down, right? I could sand it, I could do some things to try to get it to fit. If it's loose, there's nothing for me to do. Now I'm going to turn it sideways and I'm going to cut in on the shoulder. The back edge here is a little bit lower, right? Remember, this is a tapered. This thing is kind of a wedge shape, so I need to lower the back just a little bit. And there's that piece. That piece fell out. All right. Well, there it is. Pieces are cut. Now I need to see if they fit. All right, well, here is my socket and my pin. I cut them out using the dovetail saw and my chisel. Now, the next thing I want to do is just make sure they fit snug. And to do that, I've got a few items. I've got my sandpaper and I've got a file. This file has a nice square edge on it. And my key here is I do not want to overdo this. I don't want to round anything so that they don't fit very well. I really want to make sure that everything is just very, very flat and very straight. If there's any problem, all I want to do is fix it. I do not want to make a mess of anything. So I'm gonna use these few items here to just make sure that these pieces are gonna fit into my. All right, so there it is. It's going in okay. It seems to be a little bit tight at the last, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And so I think that it's this part of this tail right here. So I'm going to use my file and then try it again, and that's pretty good. All right, well here is my socket. Here is the pin sticking out that's been cut to fit, and I'm gonna go like that, and there it is. That's how a dovetail fits together. Now look at how, right, from the inside you can't tell it, but on the outside you can see, oh, and look at this, right? I can set it there and without any reinforcement, right? Notice how without any reinforcement, it holds together, right? All right, well, on our third woodworking joint, we're gonna make a miter joint. Now a miter joint needs to be made on a miter saw because it allows me to cut a 45-degree angle. So I'm gonna go ahead and move the saw to 45, and I'm gonna cut 2 miters on this board. All right, well, that gives me my miter. Now I got to figure out how to put it together. So I've got my miter pieces cut, but now the next question I need to figure out is how do I want to actually put these together? Well, there are several different corner clamps that can be used. Some can be pretty extensive because holding a miter and putting it together is a difficult proposition. So here's an old Stanley clamp. Number 400, Stanley 400. They maybe don't even make these anymore, but this is a pretty big clamp, and it allows me to put the 2 pieces at a mitered angle together, and then it gives me access. One of the nice things about most miter clamps, corner clamps, is that they give you access once the pieces are put next to each other and tightened in. They give you access so you can drive a nail in if you want. So, right here is one way of doing it, right? So I put it in this clamp, I've clamped the pieces, I put a little glue in there, and I could let it sit and dry, or I could drive a couple nails in and then take it out. Here's another very similar clamp that I could do the same thing with, and another, right? All of these allow me to push the 2 miters together. They kind of grip. And this one here has a little bit of an access area right here. I can put my nail gun in and shoot that way, and I can put my nail gun in and shoot that way if I would like to add a nail. So I have to just pick which way to put it together. In general, when you put a miter together, you're gonna wanna use something to aid in that process. So I'll go ahead and just use this clamp right here. I remember that, right? A miter joint is just a butt joint that's been cut at a 45-degree angle. So it's got to have some sort of reinforcement, or it just won't stay together. So in this case, at least to start with, I'm going to put glue on it. And then I can decide if I want to add a nail. and I tighten it up there. The glue oozes out. That looks great. There is my finished product, my miter joint. Now I can take my nail gun and I'll just tack a couple nails in, and that'll hold it until the glue dries. Well, here's another joint that's not quite so easy done by hand. This is called a box joint or a finger joint. And the box joint takes a special setup on the dado saw. We have a dado blade on here. This is a table saw, but it has 3 blades stacked together. So it's going to make a fairly wide cut. And as you've seen in your reading, we're going to make a finger joint. A finger joint is where I put it just like that. The pieces are going to fit together like that. It's also known as a box joint, right? Because historically, this was a very common joint used back before there was plastic and other kinds of materials. Most boxes made for packing and storing and shipping and all that were made out of wood. And you needed a quick and easy way to put this box together without a lot of effort, right? The one thing we know is a butt joint's not going to work, right? You have to nail it or glue it or do something else. A box joint, the fingers fit together like that. It would stay together without anything. You don't have to put anything on it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So we need a dado blade set up in a table saw. And then I have a miter gauge on here that has a little piece of wood clamped to it. And right in here, it's got a little pin sticking out. What that's going to allow me to do is put my piece of wood up next to the pin and make the cut. Then I'm going to lift the piece of wood up over and set it down on the pin. That's going to move the piece of wood over so that I end up with these little fingers. So I'll bring you in a little closer here and show you how this works. So I have my setup here. I've got my miter gauge. I've got the little piece clamped to it with my pin. I've got my dado blade in. And I've got my piece of wood. What you notice here is I've put the pieces of wood together and I've kind of marked them with a dark line. That shows me where, if I was making a box, my bottom would go there. Because I need to orient these pieces together like that, back to back when I go to make my cuts. So let's try it and see how it works. All right, now I'm ready to cut this piece over here. I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to turn this around. Okay, so I took my pieces like that, and I'm going to go like this, and then I flip them around backwards, and I'm going to put this full pin right here. This full pin has to fit over that little pin that's down here on my fixture. Next, I'm going to slide that up next to it, and here we go. Alright, well there are my pieces cut. So now I orient them back around so that the bottom lines up and those pieces, those fingers, fit together like a glove. And look at that. Piece locks together, no glue, right? No glue, no nail. That is the beauty of a interlocking finger joint or box joint. That's why dovetails and finger joints and mortise and tendons and some of the technical joints like that are used, because they hold together great. And if I add a little bit of glue in there, it's hard to get that apart. Well, there we are. We've had a great introduction to wood joinery, and I hope you've enjoyed getting to see how 4 different woodworking joints in our big array of woodworking joints are actually made. Some by hand, some by machines. Now, this is by no means a exhausted list. 4 out of, right, there's many other woodworking joints, but this just gives you a little taste of how would we build that in the shop. We've got the butt joint. That was the simplest of all of the joints that we put together. The thing we got to remember about it, although it is effective in the right setting, it has to be reinforced. By itself, right, when I let go of it, it just all falls apart. Here's kind of a glorified butt joint, the miter joint. And in a picture frame or a door frame, there is no other joint that works quite as well as a miter joint. But again, by itself, it's very weak, falls apart without some sort of reinforcement, like a spline or a nail, glue. Without reinforcement, the miter joint doesn't stay together either. It's very weak. Then we also looked at some more of the complicated joints that are much more like puzzle pieces. We looked at this dovetail that we hand cut, right? And that piece locks in there, and it's hard to get it apart. And if you add a little glue to that, boy, that's going to be really strong, and it looks beautiful, right? To see those pieces interlocked, very nice. And as a woodworker, it's something you can brag about, right? You can show off, hey, look at how those pieces, I did that myself. I cut all that and put that all together myself. And then lastly, we saw on the dado saw, the table saw with a dado blade on it, we saw the making of, again, another fairly complicated woodworking joint, the box joint or the finger joint, and how all those little fingers hold that piece together, so whether we have glue or no glue, that piece is locked together very nicely. And if we add a little glue in there, again, very hard for that to come apart. My one challenge would be go look around your house and see if you can find these, right? These different joints and where they're used. You'll be surprised that you'll be able to find them in a lot of places. Well, I hope you've enjoyed getting to see how this joinery is made using the machines here at Royal High School Woodshop. And I look forward to next time when we once again can work on a project and again explore woodworking here in the Royal High School Woodshop.